For our next venture into Poe and Price, we're going to talk about the Oblong Box. Which, to talk about the story first, there's not really a lot to talk about, and there's not really much to it. I don't think many people would consider it like a Poe classic or anything, but it is effective enough, and it is interesting to look at as far as where he was when he kind of helped develop this sort of detective genre as we know it today. And it kind of becomes an interesting take on that, where he's talking about his friend that he's seen on this ship, and his friend has his family in this mysterious box, and then the mystery surrounding what that is. And of course, when we know the morbid nature of Poe, we kind of already get the sense right away what's probably in a mystery box in a Poe story. But what's also interesting is the way this narrator, this anonymous narrator, seems to be very incompetent as far as trying to put the pieces here together. He's like, it almost gets to absurd levels of, oh, there's a mysterious box, what could this be? Oh, it's probably just a piece of art. And then he hears his friend crying in the other room and thinks, oh, the art must be that amazing. And to my understanding, it's actually been theorized that it also might be a bit of a satire on what was already done with the detective kind of thing up to that point. I think that makes a lot of sense to me because it does get funnier the more you think of how when you go into a Poe story, you tend to know what morbid things lie ahead. We know it's not going to be some piece of amazing art, and that's why somebody would be so attached to it and have such an emotional connection to it. But it's still, there's like a fun mystery element nonetheless because, as usual, it's so incredibly well written. So that brings us to the movie, The Oblong Box, which is something just completely different entirely with the same title. That you can put on the, you can put Poe's name on the poster, you can put his name in the credits, but it's a completely different story altogether, which is basically what we're going to be doing for the remainder of this series as we talk about these. We are leaving Corman behind for Gordon Hessler. What's interesting about Gordon Hessler doing this one is that he would go on to do more Poe and Price, just not together. Like, he went on to do Scream and Scream Again and Cry of the Banshee with Price, and then he went on to adapt Murders in the Rue Morgue. So this is he's starting in this territory was going to help him branch off into those other things, and we still get a sense. You can definitely tell it's a different vibe without the Corman vision. But still, there's a lot of intriguing things here, starting with the fact that we basically have a whole cast of evil characters for the most part. Like, if there's one character that's not right up front evil, it's either somebody that'll be driven evil or somebody that's hiding an evil secret or whatever. We get the whole evil thing going on with everybody. And we start off with this opening where we have Vincent Price and his brother, whose face we don't see. Sir Edward is the brother, and he's apparently done something awful on this African excursion, and they have put some sort of curse on him that completely deforms his face. And they do an interesting thing here where even before, if I remember correctly, even before they actually do this, we never see what his face originally looked like. They always shroud his face in mystery until the end of the entire movie, and we just see the reactions here. Like, we see Price's reaction to what's going on here, and then we cut forward to, in this very inspired point of view shot, we see him try to break out of this captivity that Price is holding him in, and he's like this animal that has to be locked up. There's a similar shot when he's grabbing Trench a little later also, and yeah, he has to be chained up like a monster. And that in itself already builds up the mystery of what happened to him and how much has it affected him mentally, or was he already this thing and now he's just deformed also. And they're throwing in little hints about just how bad it might be, like when Price scoffs off the idea of doctors and says, do you think doctors could put his face together again? And we see, like later on, we see like Heidi's reaction to his face. And they're just really, really building up that something hideous has happened here. It kind of reminds me of this would come up like 3 years later, but the segment in the Tales from the Crypt movie where the guy is killed in the car crash and comes back as a zombie, but we only see it from his point of view, and his face is only revealed at the last second. It's vibes of that, but before we get to what kind of payoff that might lead to, there's a lot. I really love just how much darkness is in this one. Like I said, just how evil all the characters are. Like how you have Trench, who's basically going wherever the money is. There's like a split second where you think he might have some sort of moral code with the body snatching. But it's like, no, if you're paying me enough, I'm just going to do... And of course, it's embezzlement and stuff like that is what gets him blackmailed in the first place. And this idea of this very twisted plot, like, we say it's pretty much nothing like the story. I do like the whole story they came up with. It's just the title doesn't really belong, and putting Poe's name on it doesn't belong. But it's a really fun and twisted story where Edward decides he no longer wants to be in captivity, of course, so he fakes his death, but in Romeo and Juliet fashion, nobody finds out about him having faked his death in time, so Price has him buried alive, but then Price is concerned that people will see his face at the viewing, so he wants Trench to snatch an actual dead body for him and replace him to say, this is my brother, and see his face is perfectly fine. But instead, they decide they're going to go ahead and kill the landlord, Hackett, and use his body to do it. So it just starts this whole web of bad shit. Just everybody doing every bad possible choice they can. And there's also a hint of the premature burial in this, just a little bit, with a character being in a death-like trance and then resulting in what's possible. Obviously, the premature burial ended up not going that way, but in this, being buried alive and then coming back and seeking vengeance because he thinks he was betrayed by being buried alive. And then it's basically a killing spree movie from there. There's a lot of different angles this one's coming from, and a lot of characters with a lot of different motivations, all of which are bad news. And it's even when you have, like, the helping hands, like the guys that kill Hackett, and then they do the little funeral, and then they just dump him over the bridge. And it's like, in that carelessness, so much carelessness in this does come back to bite pretty much everybody. It's like the theme of the movie, practically. And then you've got this character... You have characters who don't even necessarily need to be evil, but just are, like Weller, who is... he's the one snatching bodies for Christopher Lee, and he kills the caretaker, and we have this interaction afterwards. He kills the caretaker and then steals Edward's body and brings it back to him, which is where he wakes up. But he has this interaction with Christopher Lee where it's like, getting to kill the caretaker was almost like a side perk on top of the money he was already getting for stealing the body. And so that's just a wild thing to throw in here as it is. And then the idea that Edward is able to blackmail Christopher Lee when he realizes what's going on here. There's so much blackmail in this movie. You could have literally... I know Hitchcock has had the take on this, but you could have called this movie blackmail, pretty much. Where you have, like... There's another moment when we have the character Sally, who becomes attracted to Edward once he's covered his face and become, like, this Red Hood. And going in this whole direction where she seduces him... Where they kind of seduce each other, I guess you could say. And then there's that great transition when she's, like, going into bed with Edward and then getting slapped by Christopher Lee and, like, one scene transition to another. And then she uses this moment to become a blackmailer as well. So that's just... Then it kind of turns into that whole thing. Price starts to take a back seat to a lot of the movie when all these other characters come into play and the killing spree commences. And while we're talking of the killing spree, it is... interesting that now we're, like, in R-rated territory. Like, we're on the very tail end of the 60s here, 69 going into 70. So we can actually make an R-rated movie now, and you can see where it ups the brutality compared to what we've seen prior in this series, where we have, like, the moment where he slices Norton's throat is kind of the first gruesome moment we get. But you can see it's like, oh, it's obviously fake. It looks like he took a prop knife and wiped blood on the guy's neck or whatever. But then, just as you think that, he begins to stab Norton repeatedly, several times, and to the point that like blood's coming out of his mouth, and at that point it's like, oh yeah, we've really upped it now. There's a lot more we can get away with in movies now that we're going from the 60s into the 70s, and this movie takes full advantage of that. There's a little nudity here and there as well at this bar slash brothel thing going on. There's actually a great moment in that scene also where Edward comes to this place looking for Sally, and it's kind of a, I guess you could call it a bit of a long shot. Back in this time, I would say it counts as a long shot, where he goes through pretty much the whole area, and there's some pretty precise movement while he's going through all these people. And I don't remember a lot of long takes from this time in movies, so and it feels like there's a couple of those in this scene where the camera actually holds for a while before there's an edit. It's really interesting to see that in such a sort of early point before we really got into how much, like in the Scorsese era where camera work really started to become a star. And here, there's moments like that that feel like they stand out. And while he's going through killing everybody and looking for Sally, there's so many different things to this character of Edward, which is very interesting for a character whose face we're not even seeing, who we still haven't seen yet. Because he also kind of becomes Spectre-like in like a real horror movie character and a real horror movie presence, where when he's not moving around looking for Sally or not going on this bloody killing spree, he'll just kind of appear. There's the moment where he just goes straight to the party and appears in the window, and Price's fiance, like, it's like she sees a monster outside. That's something that feels really, it kind of calls back to the opening scenes where it felt like he was a monster in captivity. It's like now he's on the loose. And, you know, once we get to this point, then the sort of last third of the movie becomes the continuation and ultimate end of the spree of bloodshed. There's the moment where he cuts Christopher Lee's throat, which is really interesting. I guess I blocked it out of my head, and then years later, when I actually saw the whole movie, it came back to me. But when my brother and I were growing up, and we were huge Bond fans, we had seen Christopher Lee and The Man with the Golden Gun, and we'd probably seen Lord of the Rings had probably come out by then. So we were very familiar with Christopher Lee. So whenever we'd see him pop up in like a really old movie, it'd be like, oh my god, it's that guy we know. And I remember we were flipping through channels, and I think this was on Turner Classic Movies or something, and it came on at just that time where we had just enough time to say, oh my god, it's Christopher Lee. It's the guy we know from Lord of the Rings and The Man with the Golden Gun. And then it was like right then that he got his throat cut. And my brother's reaction was quite big to that. And then it was this whole full circle thing when I saw this movie in whole, and I realized that's where that scene came from. And then eventually this is about the time we get to the face reveal, which is predictably underwhelming. It's obviously not near as bad as you anticipate. You imagine it's almost going to be like Elephant Man quality, or like something's going to be... I mean, you can see when he's got the red hood over his face that it is quite flat, so it's not like anything's going to be bulging out or anything. But still, I think you'd expect... And we were at a time where makeup could have been more elaborate, easily. And there's several movies, you know, prior to this, and I think like Dr. Phibes had either just happened or was right around the corner. It's like you could have done something truly horrific. It's interesting how it feels, how little effort was put into what Edward looked like after all this, and it also it's interesting the way they reveal it when they're in the woods and it's kind of darkly lit. So when he's first revealed, it's sort of like we can see him, but we still kind of can't, which is a really nice way to do that as far as the initial reveal, so it kind of has to dawn on us a little more as it goes what he looks like in full. But then when we do get a full shot, it's like, oh, he looks slightly scarred, I guess. He looks like maybe he had just a slight run-in with acid or something, but he still looks like a human being. Like, he's identifiable as a person, and the way they build it up makes you think he's going to look practically zombified or something. So, yeah, I would say I would argue it probably would have been better to just never show his face and just always have the terror of whatever is in your imagination will be so much more horrific and scary. And that's what I would say to that. But we do end up with this wild ending where all these evil characters kind of get their comeuppance in one way or another. There's like a chain of revenge because you've got how Edward ultimately does get his revenge on Julian by biting him and giving him the disease after it's revealed that Julian is responsible for the event that made them disfigure Edward in the first place. And then the witch doctor gets his revenge on Edward as well by waking him up in his coffin. And we leave Edward at that. That's really twisted in a really fun way. So, yeah, we do come to a pretty satisfying conclusion. And overall, I would say this is... Well, it's obviously not perfect, and it has some problems and some disappointments. It's still another incredibly entertaining movie that also has absolutely nothing to do with its source material. So, I don't even know if you can call it source material, just, it's a title. The title is all they really used. But, yeah, I have a lot of fun with this one still, so when you're doing a little Poe, or a Poe or Price marathon, it's a fun one to throw in. So, I think I'll go ahead and leave this at this, so we have one more left. We're going to talk about 3 movies. We're probably going to talk about one movie in particular, and then the other 2 movies will be like, oh, by the way, we're going to talk about these 2. The 3 Poe and Price movies that are based on the poems rather than the short stories. So you probably know what those are, and which one we're probably going to focus on more than the other 2. So that's going to be what's next, and we'll finish out the rest of October with all the other stuff we've been doing, and all the stuff that's coming up. So until the next thing, I think that's it.